At 1:15 in the morning, 10 days after 9/11, Ross Parker and his girlfriend were cornered by a gang of about 10 Middle Eastern men on this very spot of the cycle path. They told him that he'd better start running before blocking his path and stabbing him in the back and neck, kicking him and beating him with a roofer's hammer. His girlfriend, Nicola Toms, narrowly escaped, and the investigation, scandal, and legal proceedings that followed were for a very brief time a national scandal, eventually to be overshadowed, as so many scandals were, by 9/11 itself. I should begin by clarifying that the response of the community was outstanding. This is not going to be a video pushing a anti-Muslim agenda or talking about how immigration is bad. In fact, members of the Pakistani community of Peterborough raised very large sums of money to encourage people to come forward with information. A lot of people have accused this case of basically being a legal lynching of a white man, and this has naturally been used as a rallying cry for white nationalists. I aim to give as objective an account as possible and not turn this into a political talking point. The fact remains that in many cases, ethnic enclaves like this one often harbor feelings of outsider status, and these feelings of exclusion from the UK sometimes lead to radicalization, although only for a very small number of people within these communities. At the same time, because of the cultural differences, these communities often have been forced to develop a close-knit structure, which they communicate mostly with just themselves and get jobs within their own community, never going too far afield. This leads to jumps in judgment from outsiders, all too eager to paint the whole community as a radical one. Of the dozen murderers apparently present at this, only 4 men were brought in initially, and this happened just days after the murder. These would be the only men tried, and of them, only 3 men were convicted. After 6 months, all of these men were free on bail. The family of Ross Parker was naturally horrified, as was the media, although the Home Office refused to recognize or comment or even explain why these killers were roaming the streets, even after letters from the family and thousands of concerned people to David Pluckett, the leader of the Home Office. Many details of this murder match similar attacks, such as the 7/7 bombings. The attackers, namely, were all college-educated, friends, well-liked in their communities, and in one case, a police informant. In short, they do not match the image of a terrorist promoted by the media during the War on Terror, as terrorists very seldom do. I will detail each of the 4 men accused. Ahmed Ali Awan was the ringleader of the attack. He was an unofficial police informant, and because of this, he fancied himself a gangster. The court found that he was obsessed with knives. This fits the fact that the police found his prints on the foot-long hunting knife, and that he brought the weapon back to the garage that the killers used as a headquarters after the murder, held it up, and said, quote, "Cherish the blood." He also attended Deacon's School and ran a job recruitment company. In spite of his fingerprints and DNA, he claimed to be at home during the murder, playing video games with his brother. The judge found him to be a ringleader. Shaid Nazir was also convicted and was a lifelong friend of Awan's. He was working with Awan as a restaurant manager at the time they went out to kill. He was educated at Bretton Woods College along with several other of the attackers. Only a month before the attack, he was in Kashmir getting married, although there has never really been an inquest into what specifically he was doing in Kashmir, because he might have been doing other things. It only really came to light that he was married there so very recently. The police found that Nazir hid the murder weapons at his home. In court, he admitted to spraying some type of gas in Parker's face and kicking him on the ground, and he claimed that the other 2 used the deadly weapons. In a very shocking moment, he pointed at 2 men in the courtroom, prosecution witnesses Zahir Abbas and Adil Rahman, and said that they were there for the attack too. As far as I can find, they never faced any repercussions and nobody ever questioned them. Sarfraz Ali, another man who was arrested for the murder, was also educated at Bretton Woods. Some minor political scandals emerged when the deputy mayor of Peterborough, Raja Akhtar, gave a reference to him at the trial. Akhtar claimed to know him, saying he was, quote, caring and responsible. Muhammad Chowdhury, a Labour councillor, also gave him a positive reference, and both were found to have rigged elections a short time later, and in fact, both served some time in jail for this. If you want to know why all these killers were roaming the streets on bond, you would likely have to ask these two. Arad seems to have been along for the ride. He claims to have been present mostly as a bystander and explained the blood on his pants as a result of tripping over Ross's body. He was a business owner. Although he was never convicted of the murder, the lawyers pointed out that the knife being carried to the scene of the crime was big enough that he must have seen it, and ought to have been declared an accomplice to the murder because he knew what was coming. The judge, Sir Edwin Jowett, summarized the murder during sentencing. Quote, "You put your heads together with the purpose of arming yourselves and of attacking an innocent man you might find by chance simply because he was a different race to yourselves. A racist killing must be one of the gravest kinds of killing." All three received life sentences, with Awan to serve a minimum of 18 years and the others at least 16. Marad was cleared of the murder and of manslaughter. In the aftermath of the case, in 2007, the BBC Editorial Standards Committee found that they hadn't shown any bias, but they declared in the same report that they, quote, "underplayed our coverage of Ross Parker's case and repeated the failings of its coverage of the murder of Chris Donald." Mackenzie criticized newspapers, including his own employer, The Sun. He stated, quote, "If you believe you're a victim of an ethnic minority and you're white, there is nowhere to go. Editors are so liberal that they are scared to be seen that they're moving to the right of their paper." Parker's mother, Davinia, expressed similar concerns that white victims of race crime are ignored. She said, quote, "Because we are white, English, we didn't get that coverage," adding, quote, "It's as if we don't count." In 2006, a Sunday Times investigation by Brendan Montague examined British newspaper archives for the coverage of racist crimes, finding, quote, "an almost total boycott of stories involved with white victims of attacks," whereas, quote, "cases involving black and minority ethnic victims are widely reported." Parker's murder led to increased racial tensions in Peterborough. At his former school, 3 Asian pupils were suspended for an attack on an Afro-Caribbean pupil. A relative of the victim then attacked an Asian teacher in retaliation. The scandal quickly heated up, and in November 2001, Home Secretary David Plunkett banned all marches in Peterborough for 3 months as it was feared violence would be caused by the Anti-Nazi League and National Front, who both sought to hold protests on the same day. As a result of the murder of Parker, local authorities set up a unity scheme whereby gang members from different communities were trained as youth workers to ease racial tensions and reduce violence. However, problems still persisted, with racist graffiti appearing near the murder scene 2 years after the incident, reading, quote, "no-go area for whites," and, quote, "Paki Powa," and, quote, "death to whites." Since then, Peterborough has been mostly quiet, having not witnessed a similarly violent hate crime since the murder of Ross Parker.